All right, Joe, we are back on the podcast where we are training men in spiritual fitness. And we are, I think, week like 6 of our 8-week challenge, where we are guiding men through the life of a Christian hero, Hudson Taylor. And along the way, challenging them to pray for 20 minutes a day. And guys, I hope you're doing that. I hope it's maybe becoming a bit better pattern in your life, where you're at least, looking at the fact that prayer is hard and that it does take setting aside time in your day to go for it. But I do hope that you're starting to see progress in your prayer life, because we're asking guys, 20 minutes a day prayer, read some of the life of Hudson Taylor, memorize those promises of God, 8 different promises that we've given guys to memorize. And I hope you're finding meditation on those promises to be powerful in your life. But then also setting aside a time every week to gather as friends or gather with a mentor and discuss all of this. And I know for me, it's so far been a hugely beneficial challenge. And we're at this spot in the life of Hudson Taylor where there, again, are more and more crazy stories. Oh, go figure. This is what he does. But here's a few 4 stories that just quickly that he tells us in these chapters. He tells a story of a guy that steals his stuff, but then, Hudson Taylor being a stand-up guy, he doesn't pursue any sort of retribution. You got a story of a guy who is increasingly interested in Jesus and is almost there and making a decision, and then he drowns tragically, and Hudson Taylor is there as he drowns. A story where Hudson Taylor leaves a missionary agency because he is convicted about that agency being in debt. And he's like, no, I can't be a part of something like that. And then a story where he joins this Chinese man in his frustration that it took so long for the gospel to reach inland China, and how heartbreaking that is. So some great stories that guys are going to read this week. But I kind of want to approach this from a big picture angle of just asking you, as we've now read so many stories of Hudson Taylor's life, I want to put you on the spot and say, give me one word that you would use to describe Hudson Taylor. And actually, I want guys that are listening to this, if you've been following along with this Hudson Taylor challenge, I want you to think about what one word would you use to describe Hudson Taylor. And Joe, what would you say? What's your one word?
It's tempting to say faith, but that's not going to be my word. I'm going to say humility. And I think because humility is often kind of the womb from which even faith is birthed. I mean, if you've got pride, you don't step out and trust. You think you can handle it, or you doubt God that he can handle it. And one of the things that's amazing about Hudson Taylor is there is that humility of a child depending upon God, but it's something that comes out in stories about him as well. One of my favorite stories with Hudson Taylor is later on. This is past where we are in the book, but he's at this point he's going through Canada, and he's in like a train, and there's like this article, and his friends like reading an article about him, because now at this point he's well known, and in this article it's saying, Hudson Taylor, he's not that remarkable. He's not nearly as eloquent as our Canadian preachers, and he's not that tall, and he doesn't have any great personality. And Hudson Taylor, he hears this, and he just kind of laughs and says, I've always thought God made me small to show how great he is. And man, I'd be angry, that would sting. I'd have all kinds of reactions. I wouldn't rejoice in the fact that I'm small and not that remarkable, because it all shows just how gracious and glorious God really is. So yeah, humility, that's my label for Hudson Taylor.
I think it's a good one. Yeah, I'd be hard pressed to argue with that. He definitely displays humility all throughout every story that we read. I would take a different tact. I think my one word I'd use to describe Hudson Taylor is ridiculous, which is and this says more about me than it does Hudson Taylor, I think. I find him ridiculous. The stories he tells and the life he lived and the decisions he made are remarkable. But I'm just like, oh my gosh, is he really doing that? Is he really taking that step? Is he really trusting that big? It's just ridiculous to me. I would say this is a guy that when you read about him, if you don't think, oh my gosh, this guy's crazy, then I don't know what to say about you. What it says about me, I think, is I've got a lot of growing to do, I guess, in admitting that. But I think there's probably a lot of words, and I'd be interested, to hear. I'm gonna have to ask my friends that, what's the one word you'd use to describe Hudson Taylor? Because there's a lot of words you could use. Yeah, inspiring. You could say, oh, well, he was an evangelist. He was, trusting, and maybe just hero. He was a Christian hero, right? It's kind of what we've summarized this as. But I want to kind of take this episode, actually, Joe, and go back and forth with you on three words that I think no one could use to describe Hudson Taylor. All right. So we're going to do the opposite. I'm going to give you three words that I don't think you should use or could use to describe Hudson. Here's the first one. I'll see if you agree with me. I don't think that you could describe Hudson Taylor as being indifferent, right?
Hmm. Absolutely not. I mean, indifference, apathy, these are words that just could not stick on the character of Hudson Taylor. And I think we've got to go the opposite direction. I mean, there's this overwhelming sense of urgency that just defines the heart, the life of this man, and an urgency that really recognizes the seriousness of the moment, the plight of those that haven't heard and do not know who Jesus is. And so just that, sense of compulsion, his own person being compelled out onto the mission field, but trying to just lock arms with as many people as he can and bring them with him. I mean, this sense of starting a whole movement of a mission work out in that direction of China.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, the first chapter, I can't remember what chapter number it is, but it'll be in the email we send to guys. The first chapter you read this week is where I think Hudson Taylor gets preachy for the first time. Right, he gets a little preachy because it's him telling the story of the man who rides with him in the boat and is interested in Jesus but isn't quite convinced yet, and so Hudson's really just excited about having him along. But then as Hudson's below deck, he hears a splash in the water. He goes up, the man has disappeared, obviously fell off the boat, and there's this other boat of guys on the river, and he's like, and they have nets that they could use to go and find the guy and drudge him up. And how he basically describes those guys is indifferent. They just don't care. They see a drowning man and they just don't care, and it's just I mean, it's appalling. And Hudson writes it in such a way that we are appalled by the very indifference of these men, looking at a man who's drowning and not caring. And he uses it as kind of a parable of how we look at the lost world and how often we are so indifferent to those that are around us who are drowning in the penalty of sin and have no hope there, and how we just sit back. And it's really, again, it gets a little preachy, but in a good way, I think, right? Because this is an issue that we all face, and this is something that, if we're going to have a sense of urgency, which is ultimately, I think, what we see in Hudson Taylor's life, seeing the sense of urgency towards calling people to Christ has to be there as men.
I think that's right. And I think that's where, if we imagine Hudson Taylor in our lives, he would be that friend that, his passion, his fervency to go out and do evangelism, it'd rub off. It would either irritate you and make you really uncomfortable, or you'd find yourself all of a sudden, growing in your own passion. I mean, one of the things, I love, because he carries this, he ends up going eventually back to England, and, he has these opportunities to begin to speak to people. And he constantly, whenever he's like preaching, he has this way of just putting people in this situation where they're boxed in and they just don't have any excuse to not go out and share the gospel. And one of the things I love he does, I mean, there's this one moment and he's just telling people, I mean, if you believe that all these people are lost, and if you believe that people have this immortal soul, and if you believe Jesus is the way and truth and the life, he goes on and he gets to this point. This is so, I mean, it cuts to the heart. He says, speaking to that person who's saying, well, I'm not called to China. He says, it will not do to say that you have no special call to go to China. With these facts before you, you need rather to ascertain whether you have a special call to stay at home. And that idea, like, we love to just think, well, I've never heard the voice of God telling me to go overseas. And he's saying, well, have you ever heard the voice of God telling you to stay where you are?
Oh.
And if that's the voice of God, the same spirit that would, make you share the gospel abroad, it should make you share the gospel at home. And so nobody gets out. Everybody leaves the church thinking, I'm called in this Great Commission.
Yeah. Again, ridiculous. He's a friend that I would describe. I mean, stop being so ridiculous, man. But in the best of ways, he's ridiculous in the best of ways. But I can't help but continue to think, oh man, he has a high a high standard there. And I think he's always also pointing towards that idea of stop waiting on someone else to act, or stop waiting on the right circumstances. Like he does, again, that sense of urgency, like let's do this, let's move on. It reminds me of a buddy who always says we've got to kick someone out of our churches. And by that he means like there's a lot of people that walk through churches. Someone should do this, something about this. Someone should do something about that. It's time to fire someone, and it's you that needs to, if you see something that needs to be done, it's you. And stop pointing towards, and that's, man, Hudson Taylor never says, someone should do some. He sees, and he has this urgency, and especially for the lost, and he's just going for it.
Yeah. I love how the vision for this China Inland Mission really gets conceived, because there's this moment, again, he's back in England. He's in a church service in Brighton. It's like, you can imagine 1,000 people. It's a wonderful service, singing fantastic, great message. Everybody's leaving the building thinking, what a great night of just corporate worship. But man, he's devastated. He's in agony. He goes out, he's taking a walk on the beach, because all he can think about is everybody in England can comfortably hear the gospel at, when they're, every desire. And then there's all these people in China that have never yet to hear it once. And so, from this soul agony gets birthed this vision to, let's take the gospel to the interior of China. And I think the wrong way to read that story is to think that everybody in the church should have had that vision to go to China. The right way to hear that story is, man, God puts it on the heart of somebody that sees something nobody else sees. And when you're in that place and you're thinking, why isn't anybody doing something? It's one of the sure signs that you're the guy who's called to go out and do it. And I mean, for Hudson Taylor, that was, go out and recruit missionaries and go take the inland of China. But for other guys, I mean, what is it on your heart? What are you seeing that nobody else, sees? What are you staying up late, frustrated that this isn't happening locally? Man, that's something God's putting on your heart. And it's time for that to become a vision, and time for something that you begin to act on.
Yes. Don't wait. Love it. All right. Second word I've got for you. Second word that I think, in my mind, you can't use this word to describe Hudson Taylor, and that's greedy. I don't think you could say Hudson Taylor was greedy at all. In fact, even just one of the stories that guys will read this week is, where he faces this time of conviction of, like, the agency he's, being financially supported by a little bit is in debt. And he's like, man, I don't know that I can see that lines up with what the Bible teaches. So he even just says, I just won't be paid. That's fine. I'll just I'll figure it out another way. And he goes further in that. He's like, it's not that I need money for myself. I could use some more money to take care of the needs of those that are around me. And it's just like the deeper and deeper you get into them, the more and more you see there is no greed, especially for selfish desires there within him. Correct, right? No greed in Hudson Taylor?
Yeah, I think, for me, it gets to a certain part and I think, okay, God, thus far, no further. Now, this bit is mine. I need this much of my life to rule or to indulge, and I'll let you have the rest. And, with Hudson Taylor, I mean, there's just, whatever God needs, is open for him to take. Yeah. And I think one of the effects, again, if you imagine Hudson Taylor being in your friend group, what would happen is all of a sudden that sense of some bit of ownership, you're going to feel like actually convicted that no, if you're going to follow Jesus, that Jesus deserves all. And I think that's one of the things, it sometimes surprises people as they read Hudson Taylor's life, because Hudson Taylor refused to ask for money, and he refused to let the missionaries with him ask for money. And we often think, well, why? Is that just kind of an act of cowardice and sheepishness, and it's awkward to talk about money? And the answer is not at all. The answer is that actually, and this is something he says at some point, is he talks about the reason he doesn't let his missionaries go and ask for money is that actually often, he says, what God wants is not a money contribution, but personal consecration to his service abroad, or the giving up of a son or a daughter more precious than silver or gold to his service. So in other words, when he gets to the end of a service that Hudson Taylor is leading, he's not asking for your money because he believes God might want more than your money. That's the least he's going to want. And so he wants you to go home, and he wants you to agonize in your own conscience and really wrestle with God. What are you asking of me? And then, to come back, and maybe it's going to be money, and maybe it's going to be a whole lot more. And so, man, yeah, that challenge to just open-handed, God, it's all yours. I'm all yours. What are you asking of me? I think that would be the effect of actually being around this man.
Yeah, ridiculous. Again, I can't get him. Give up your child, not just give a little money, give up your child. Yeah. Oh,
That's right.
that's easy, Hudson. Thanks, friend. I appreciate that. But it's true. And it's, if you were to say Hudson Taylor were greedy, I think it would be in the sense of like he's unsatisfied. And what is he unsatisfied with? He's unsatisfied. There's never enough people who know Christ. Like, so he is the greedy in that, like, there needs to be more and more people. There's never enough Christians taking obedience seriously. That can't be quenched for him. It cannot be quenched. He just keeps on and keeps on. There's never enough trust that you can place in God. Yeah. Those are the ways that you see him unsatisfied. And I think that, hopefully, as he becomes in our circle of friends, that it rubs off on us. Hopefully, that's the kind of things I want to see in my life as well. All right. Last word here that I don't think you could describe Hudson Taylor as, and this one's tricky because I think this is actually a word that guys would describe Hudson Taylor as, because there's been actually some research done that shows, like, when you read a book and they're describing a character, according to how much details they leave out about the character, you often read that character to basically be more and more like yourself, unless the author says otherwise. So, like, when I read someone, I assume that they are 40-year-old guy, 40-year-old white guy, basically, it's what I'm unless they say, oh, he's 70, or there's indications of that. I always assume they're my age. And I think that most guys, I don't know what age you are as you listen to this, you're reading these stories of Hudson Taylor and you're seeing him as whatever age you are, right? But I do want to make it clear, in these stories, in these chapters that you're reading right now, Hudson Taylor is 24 years old. All right. So he's not 40 years old like I'm seeing him, and which is even more difficult because most of the pictures you see of Hudson Taylor out there are when he's 50, 60, 70 years old. So the word that I would say you can't describe Hudson Taylor as is old. You can't describe him as old. He does eventually get old. Okay, I get that. But right now, where we're at in his storyline, he's not old. He's 24, Joe. He's 24 years old, and he's living out these stories. What are the implications there for guys who are reading this?
I'm going to use your word. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous that he's in his 20s at this point. But at the same time, it's not ridiculous. I think, and this is what guys need to stop and think about, especially young guys listening. We live in an age where it's like, throw your 20s away, just go out, travel the world, have some great experiences, and then, adult sometime in your 30s and get married and have kids and et cetera. Man, if Hudson Taylor, if he's one of your friends in your 20s, he's looking at you saying, why are you wasting your life? I mean, okay, it's one thing to travel to China without a purpose and just to go look at like national monuments. Why not go someplace and win some souls? Why not do something that's got like eternal reward? And so I think there's this calling for young guys, invest your life in something that has real significance. It may not be something that gets written about in a book, but God sees it, and he sees if you're wasting your life, and he knows if it's, stuff that actually really honors him. And man, make the choice of Hudson Taylor and do the things that have lasting significance.
Yeah. And I want to take the opposite view in some senses of talking to some older guys. I want to give I think there's a prescription for older guys that are stuck, because what happens over time is, you become complacent and you become we lose some of that vigor and sense of urgency as we age. And if you're that guy sitting in church, stuck, complacent, bored, here's your prescription. Go hang out with some 20-year-olds, like that. Honestly, even now, like, I find some value with hanging out with some 20-year-olds. They have energy, they have vigor. And right now, I think in our culture and time, like you're saying, maybe they don't quite have a sense of, hey, I can actually accomplish something in my 20s. But there is an energy that you can get from some 20-year-old guys that I think is infectious for guys in their 50s. Like, we need to be able to remember what it was like at that time, and then to help them see, wait, don't don't settle like I did, right? Like, what,
Yeah.
man, I've asked this question of you. I've asked it of a lot of my friends, like, hey, what would you tell your 20-year-old self if you could? We asked that, everybody asked that question, I think, at some point. And I think that we overlook the fact that we can tell 20-year-old dudes stuff right now. Like, if you're 40, if you're 50, like, there are 20-year-olds in your community. Go talk to them and go tell them that thing that you want to say. And what you want to say is, dude, don't waste your life. Get out there.
Yeah.
There's so much of value that you can do and that you can produce. And your 20s are a great time to do that. And then, yeah, the message to the 40-year-olds, I think, is the same. Like, don't think it's over. Like, there's still a
Right.
lot to be accomplished there. So, yeah, I don't know anything else that you'd say to guys of
Yeah, I would just say, I think one of the lessons for young guys as well, it's not surprising that Hudson Taylor, in one sense, has this dream, this vision, when he's a young man, because only a guy in their 20s, early 30s is dumb enough and bold enough to actually think they can take the whole of China. But God uses that. He uses that zeal, that gumption,
yes,
and he takes
yes,
it and works it into his kingdom. And so, old guys, make room for that enthusiasm. Don't quench that vision. But equally, let's be honest. I mean, those young guys, you're going to need the old guys as well, to
yes.
be getting counsel from and helping you through this. But a wonderful picture of a guy from early years just really choosing to put it all out there and go and see what he can do for the Lord.
All right, well, I want to leave guys with just one clear challenge for the week as they do this Hudson Taylor exercise that they're reading and discussing everything. But here's one added thing I want you to do in your group of friends. I want you to look your friends in the eyes and ask them for one word to describe you. What one word would you use to describe me? And I want you to think about what one word would you use to describe some of your friends. And I want you to just kind of talk about that. Why did your friends arrive at the conclusion of the words that they did? I think it's a time to encourage one another. One of the big benefits of friendship is especially gospel friendships, is the encouragement we receive from one another. We are not alone. We must keep going. And we do that through, man, verbally, we've got to encourage one another. So, man, give your friend a word and be honest. Look, it may be that they've got a lot of room to grow, but take some time to identify what you're seeing in one another and how would you describe each other and how can you continue to grow and move beyond where you're at. So y'all try that out this week. Continue through this Hudson Taylor Challenge. Join us again next week as we've got a couple more weeks left in this exercise.